What you're about to witness is a true and sad story about a man and a machine. One of unrequited love, of forlorn hope, spanning nearly a decade. A roller coaster ride of near misses and bad metaphors. Now sure, we can love machines, but can machines love us? No, they can't. Not without this chip anyway. To keep this from becoming an otherwise short video, I'm going to lump in a dubiously related topic. Hope you don't mind. In no particular order, I'd like to talk about filing first, since this is now the all filing all the time channel. And only then introduce you to my new die filer, known in some circles as a filing and sawing machine. Not sure the difference, if any, between the two, but I've always called them die filers. There's been an elephant in this room for much too long, and quite frankly, I'm running out of shop space. So I'm coming out swinging. Sure, I might lose 80% of my subscriber base during this Ford versus Chevy debate, but I won't be silenced. Unless, of course, you stop this video right now. Lift the file in the backstroke? Or can you drag it back to the start, not passing go and not collecting your $200?
Why are you looking at me?
I used to hate files. Why cough up all the blood, sweat, and tears when you can have a milling machine, or a lathe? Heck, even an angle grinder, right? I mean, who's got time for hand filing? Well, if you're of that mindset, there's really nothing I can say to change your mind. These things need time. But if you've already seen the light, you'll likely understand why my good quality files are counted among my most cherished tools. Good quality files equal awesome. I mean, you folks have seen what ClickSpring does, right? Incredible. And if you ever get the chance to get in close with a tool and die maker, try and have a look at what those folks can do with tiny little riffler files and little broken off pieces of grinding stones. Now that we're on the same page about ClickSpring, the question was, should you lift the file on the backstroke? Trust me, that hurt me more to film than it did you to watch. Most people have it drilled into them early on that dragging a file backwards across a cut is sacrilegious. Even if they do it themselves and no one's looking, if they see you doing it, you can bet your bottom dollar they'll have something to say. Sure, if they witness a crime against humanity, oh well, it's none of their business, move along. But if they see you drag a file backwards, hell hath no fury. Premise being that not lifting the file on the return stroke, dragging it, will kill it in short order. And as every compassionate human being with even a glimmer of love in their heart knows, you just don't do that to a file. You just don't. Well, I'm here to tell you that's a bunch of hooey. Or perhaps it's true. Bottom line, it's complicated. Or it's not. Before giving you my non-committal and evasive answer, let's consider a few things together. File teeth generally look something like this. Like this. That non-symmetric or sawtooth pattern means it really wants to cut in one direction rather than the other. Each tooth has a massive amount of support behind it in one direction. In theory anyway, it makes sense that pulling a file backwards probably isn't a good idea. Since I mentioned sawtooth, let's take an intimate look at an actual saw. Saws, of course, have teeth that look quite similar to a file, but no one seems to have a problem drawing a saw backwards, do they? In fact, pulling a saw backwards is usually a good way to get the cut started where you want it. Yeah, this is for wood. We were talking about metal. Fine. How about a hacksaw? Don't sit there and tell me you lift a hacksaw in the backstroke. Yeah, I think most people, when presented with a problem that can only be solved with a hacksaw, start by sliding the saw all over the place until it happens to bite somewhere. 9 times out of 10, it isn't where you want it to cut, but close enough, right? As soon as a stable cut starts, green light goes on and they go absolutely berserk until they're through the part. Certainly can't deny that that works. Probably doesn't make for the longest lasting hacksaw blade, but it works. Maybe you can see where I'm going with this. The tooth form on a hacksaw blade is much more aggressive than on a file, not to mention it's thinner or smaller. So why don't these teeth all shear right off when you go into your berserker hacksaw rage? Unless it's a race against the clock trying to get that bike lock off before anybody sees you, you're probably sawing at a comfortable pace and naturally taking a bit of pressure off on the backstroke. You're putting power into the push stroke, but unconsciously, you've learned not to kill yourself on the backstroke, thereby likely taking pressure off the teeth. As evidence for that, go out to your garage right now. Hacksaw your way through, I don't know, maybe a 1/4 inch round, like your wrought iron chair leg from your patio set that's just welded mild steel. I'd wager that all 8 times the blade popped out of your hacksaw before you got through the round stock, it popped out on the push stroke. Now, what was this video even about? If I'm filing, I'm likely cleaning up a part, like a simple deburr, or maybe fine-tuning a fit, or maybe I'm just trying to get some funny shape I can't get with another tool. In any case, if my file's out, there usually isn't too much more to go, and I'd wager most people are in that same boat. Because of that, you don't usually see people go as savage with a file as they might with a hacksaw. I mean, there are always monsters out there in this world. Unless you're using a file to break out of prison, typically you're shooting for accuracy over material removal rate. You're at a point where each file stroke counts, and one extra in the wrong place might make the difference between a good fit and a sloppy one, or a clean surface versus a crooked one. Figuring out how much to file off and where, well, is a subject for another time, but control is usually always important. Let's start easy. If I'm deburring, though what you're seeing is a little bit more than deburring, I think I usually lift the file. I'd have to go back through the security footage, but usually I lift. Not because I'm worried about the file, but I want to see what's going on. If it's not completely deburred, I might give it another shot. I'm just looking to break the edge, nothing fancy, but I want to get the whole thing. But let's say instead I'm cutting a chamfer. A chamfer I'd like to look nice. Now, if you can't tell, I'm reaching for examples here. On this part, you could just mill it. But you may have parts that don't have straight sides, some round feature you're trying to chamfer, or maybe it's some awkward feature on a bigger part that you don't have the tooling to reach. Anyway, my power strokes, in this case with a coarser, larger file, likely include lifting, since again I'm trying to see where my work is going. I'm still mostly human, so my file strokes aren't going to go down with 100% machine-like accuracy. Plus there's a natural tendency to move the file in a swinging motion, which might cause you to roll over the surface you're trying to develop. Once I'm close, the file leaves the work less and less. I'm starting to drag. Mostly because after this much work, I'm really hating my file and getting spiteful. If my scribe lines are what I was going for, I'd still have quite a bit to go, but I'm starting to break a sweat. That's never a good sign. I'm going to switch to a finer cut file. If I lift the file too far away, I risk losing the angle I was working at. Like as I file, I develop a certain muscle memory for where the file is going, where the material is, and sort of a consistency of motion. I've already brought in most of the surface, and I'm fine-tuning at this point. Although it might look and sound like I'm dragging the file, and I suppose I am technically, I try to keep the return strokes very light. Again, if I take the file away completely, I risk losing my reference. I risk losing that muscle memory that tells me where that surface is. Okay, this is starting to get a little over the top. This isn't some Zen Buddha magic trick. If it sounds stupid, it's because I'm trying to put into words something that comes naturally with practice. It's like trying to explain walking.
Okay, left foot, no, right. Yeah, definitely right first. Wait.
Think of it perhaps like sharpening a knife. You know how you rock the knife a little looking for the bevel? And when you've got it, you pop and lock and only use your ankles and your nose muscles to rock yourself back and forth while keeping everything else the same? It's like that. I know this is grinding or abrading, but it's like that. You try not to let go of the surface so you don't lose your reference. If you came down every time, pick the knife up on the backstroke, well, things might not look so nice. The point is, I don't think dragging is the end of the world if you let up a little bit. And now that I've been playing with the die filer, I don't know. I'm not sure anymore. Dragging might not be the end of the world even if you don't let up a little bit. We'll get to that in a minute, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Would your files last longer if you didn't let up a bit? Maybe. Well, probably. I guess if you're throwing out a file a week, you might want to reconsider your technique. But to me, if it is wearing out, but I'm getting the results I need, with a reasonable lifespan out of the file, well, it's a consumable tool, like the hacksaw blade. When the middle third is nice and shiny and completely toothless, I'll throw it out and get another one. Or in the case of a file, turn it into a scribe or something else useful. Oh, and just for the record, if you've got a lot of people around while you're filing, dragging on the backstroke is usually more acceptable when working with softer materials. Aluminum, brass, that sort of stuff. In fact, I've heard theories that a light drag on the backstroke actually helps keep the file cleaner. I don't know if I've noticed personally, since I'm already a file barbarian after all. Oh, and while we're here, keep your files clean. You can't do clean file work if your tools are clogged with chips. The closer you are to your finished surface, the more often you'll probably want to clean it too. Then again, you are moving less material, but you're likely using a finer file. Not to mention, if you don't clean it, you'll likely see it in your surface. You'll have what they call little pins or chips stuck in your file. That'll leave nice long scratches on your shiny part. If your file card is too big to get into a fine-toothed file, use some softwood to push and wipe across the teeth. I hear bamboo works well, but where am I going to get bamboo? Since when I'm filing, my file card is always in reach, I tend to use this back edge of the file card itself. You sort of push it across the teeth. It usually does a good job of getting in there and cleaning them out. I apologize, I lost a video file here. And by lost, I mean I forgot to hit the record button. I think everyone knows this, but you can also use chalk to keep the file from clogging. It won't stop the file from cutting, of course, but it does help to keep chips from getting stuck down in the teeth. Oh, and if we've got any people out there that have been getting bent out of shape seeing me manhandle my files, touching the faces as I talk with my hands, or just digging the fact that I'm setting them down on hardened surfaces, well, I've got just one thing to say to you. I'm really glad to have you watching.
So what's this newfangled die filer thing you're talking about? Back in my day, we had to file by hand.
Well, I'm glad you asked. And might I add, your timing is absolutely impeccable. I'd like to file a square hole in the middle of this piece of cold rolled steel. I'm shooting for about a 1/2 inch square. That's somewhere between 12 and 13 M&Ms. I've marked it and drilled out the bulk of the material, 4 smaller holes at the corners and a larger one on center. To lead into this, however, allow me to demonstrate everything I know about this machine via a short, non-musical montage. To the best of my knowledge, I'm all set up. I've adjusted the position of the file in the stroke, so I'm working on the flat part of the file. This file's got a bit of a taper towards the end. I just kind of shifted it so I'm not working near that taper. In this case, I've got the machine set as slow as it'll go. I'm at about an 80mm stroke length. My hold downs are in place. This machine has built-in air, I think some sort of diaphragm pump. It's a nice touch, just blows all the chips away, keeps the work area clean. What I really like about this thing, when it's running this slow if we're filing metal, I don't need to wear my safety glasses. I'll be right back. I think I got something in my eye. I'm far enough from my scribe lines, I'm not too worried about overshooting them. As I get closer, I think I'd want to switch to a thinner file. With this size file in this size hole, I can't really rotate the part to get the scribe lines in front of me, like in my line of sight. Fact of the matter is I'm resisting the urge to knock all the handles off my hand files to convert them to machine files. I do have some finer cut files that came with the machine, and I'll switch to those as I get closer to finishing. I'm getting really close to my scribe lines. I'm going to switch out to the smaller file. But as I've been working through this, I realized that I can just loosen the top clamp and rotate the work into a new position without having to break everything down. Of course, I was finishing the last of the 4 sides when I realized that I is smart. Brevettata means patented. And boy, these folks must have been awfully proud of their machine because they've got that plastered everywhere. But you know, it's a nice machine. You may have already figured this out, but this is an Opus 140, and it's completely obsolete. What you're looking at here is a dead machine standing. About 20 or 30 years ago, probably more, 40, as EDM was gaining popularity anyway, filing machines began their march of death. But you can still find these things. Well, obviously, right? But they're not easy to get. Murphy's Law dictates that no matter where you live, whichever machine you think you want, it's always on the complete other side of the planet. But thanks to the internet, that's not necessarily a problem anymore. Shipping is. The machine itself cost barely more than scrap metal price, but I'm not going to tell you how much I had to pay to ship this thing here. This thing weighs 1,000 pounds. That's not a joke. This thing is literally like 5 pounds shy of 1,000. To maybe help put that in perspective, this machine, meant just for filing, weighs just as much as my mill. My lathe weighs 1,300 pounds. And I bought this completely sight unseen. I mean, except for a few internet pictures, because, well, I've completely lost my marbles. Allow me to explain. Just like everything else, it was the internet's fault. See, before the internet, the only die filers I'd ever heard of were small benchtop ones. In the hobby circles, they were usually kits you'd build yourself, ordered out of the back of a magazine. Then, one day, a fine gentleman posted a story and some pictures of a filing machine he'd found in the Midwest somewhere, I think, or maybe Michigan. It was an Opus. I tried to dig that post up to no avail. I do remember mention in the post of his opting out of an even larger version, so if memory serves, his must have been the Opus 120, the ever so slightly smaller version of the 140. Anyway, to wide-eyed little me, it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I knew one day I just had to have one. Think of this as sort of my version of an old collector's car. I didn't have any money, of course, barely had any files, but what I did have was a dial-up modem. I couldn't find much info on it, but did find an entry on lathes.co.uk, which I've had bookmarked for going on 10 years now. It's the European equivalent of vintage machinery. Anyway, machine lust was really reason number 2 for the purchase. Truth be told, the real reason I bought it was so I could use this video's title. You sit there and tell me that alone wasn't worth every penny. As I'm getting closer to finishing this square hole, I'm finding that a square file might not be the best way. As I get into the corners, I get 2 sides of the file that cut at the same time, which despite the hold downs is trying to pull my part up off of the table. It's really just starting to make a racket more than anything else. So I'm going to try to finish it off with a triangular file. Alright, I think this is it. The dimensions look right. Nothing left to do but clean it up and try it out. I did end up going a smidge out of square, but I think I'll be fine. Introducing the world's first 2-headed ratchet. Why waste time taking out 1 spark plug at a time when you can get 2? What if you only have an odd number of spark plugs or tire lugs, you might ask? Well, not to worry. Our R&D department is working round the clock on the single socket version. Maybe just to state the obvious, if you're looking for a machine to really move metal, well, this isn't it. The die filer is a finishing machine. I'm talking about steel here, mind you. Brass, aluminum, plastics, wood maybe, that's a different story. I mean, even there, they're still certainly not material hogs, but you get what I'm saying. On the spectrum of material removal, if you had things like saws, angle grinders, and torches on the one end, maybe lathes, mills, and drills in the middle, a filing machine might be way over on the other end, somewhere in the shadows with grinders perhaps. And as far as being money makers, not by a long shot. I mean, these things are up there with shapers. Fun to have, might get you out of a bind once a year, but for a hobby guy like me, well, it's just fun to have. I have a feeling it'll be a useful addition. I'm usually not in a rush to get anything done, and it adds a few tricks up my sleeve. And speaking of tricks, they call this a filing and sawing machine because you can install a saw in place of the file. This is a hacksaw blade, and it's really more a visual aid. That certainly would work, but I've got a bandsaw for that. What could be really nice are thinner, like fret saws. Turn this thing into a scroll saw. The upper support arm on this machine has a drawbar. It's this big knurled nut at the top, which I'd assume is used to put saws in tension. Unfortunately, I didn't get the sawing adapter that goes in place of the file holder, but that might be my next project. I bet a thin fret saw setup would be just marvelous to have. The other thing I didn't get is the saw blade support. It's like a third arm that attaches to the dovetail there in the back. Again, from the manual, it appears to support the saws on the back edge, but that should be easy enough to make, I think. The other thing I've seen people do with these machines, online, mind you, this is the first time I'm seeing one of these in real life, is to add a dovetail slide to the table, mount high-speed steel in the upper support, and use these machines for slotting, like cutting keyways the way a shaper would, only vertically. This machine should have a 3-inch capacity probably if used for slotting. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm really happy with how this turned out. I don't know if that was really any faster than filing it out by hand. Maybe a little bit faster. I'm still figuring this thing out, so I wasn't particularly aggressive with the cutting. So potentially faster, but certainly with a lot less sweating involved. The thing I really like about it, and this is hard for me to check, but none of the filed edges are rolled over. They're nice and flat and look like they're pretty square. I don't really have a square small enough to get in there. I'd have to sweep an indicator across that. But the table is set to 0 in both directions. Speaking of which, if you're wondering why these are called die filers, well, to the best of my knowledge, they were pretty good for shaping, forming, and adding draft to tooling, to dies, as in punches and dies. Again, all before EDM came around. This table swings 15 degrees, I believe, in both directions. So once you had your shape cut out, you could come over to this machine and draft all of the cutting edges. Add clearance behind all of the cutting edges. Now, although I bet that's fun on a small part like this, but this machine has a 4-inch capacity. I'd hate to be the fella having to do all that filing. I haven't checked the tram. The table is set to 0. The cut looks pretty decent, squareness-wise. I'm sure if I went down to finer files, I could get a near-polished surface on the inside. Well, I'm rambling now. That's usually a sure sign that it's time to wrap things up. But here's the thing I haven't been able to figure out. Granted, I'm making this video to show off my new toy and shoot the poop here in the garage, but what really got my gears going is this whole filing mechanics thing. If you recall way back to chapter 1 of this video, we said pulling a file backwards across your work would lead to its early demise. But this machine, shows no mercy at all on the backstroke. I mean, I got it with 3 or 4 of the original factory files, and they're still cutting. These files are branded. They're the same exact files shown in the operator's manual. I assume these are what came with the machine. I guess they could have been bought later. Or it's possible they haven't seen much use. But at over 40 years, I mean, come on, what are the odds of that? And best I can tell, the file teeth look exactly like any other file teeth I've seen. Other than the form, being square on both ends so they're easier to mount, they don't appear to have anything particularly special to them, like no special tooth form that might make them specifically machine-only files. Not that I can see anyway. On the machine's slowest speed, at 60 strokes per minute, I can sort of let up pressure when the machine is going through its backstroke. At effectively a stroke per second, I can sort of keep up. Any more than that, and there's no way someone's letting up on the backstroke while this thing is cutting. With all that said, I'd love to know what you think. Is dragging a file an old wives' tale? If it isn't, what is it about machine files that allows them to take the abuse? Leave a comment if you know or have a theory. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this long-winded tour of the newest edition. And as always, thanks for watching. Oh, on the off chance you don't know the guy and you enjoy watching metalworking, be sure to check out Adam of ABOM79. Now that guy is really into files. Sure doesn't seem to be a lot to it at first glance, does there? But I'm picking things up the more I use it. Scratch what I said earlier. This die filer is a lot faster than doing it by hand. Without it, I would have, dare I say it, died filing. Thanks for watching.